Millionaire's risky test for a maid's daughter takes a turn he never saw coming. Watch till the end. Like, comment, and subscribe. Eric Lane stood in the dim stillness of his penthouse bedroom, his body hidden just beyond the slightly cracked door. The air was heavy with silence, yet inside his chest his heartbeat thudded with a steady, unshakable rhythm. His eyes never left the figure in the next room. The safe, built into the wall and lit by a recessed spotlight, stood wide open. Inside lay meticulously stacked bills, $500,000 in crisp hundreds, each bundle banded and perfectly aligned. The faint scent of leather and paper drifted from it, mingling with the polished wood aroma of the expensive flooring. Earlier that morning, Eric had made a deliberate choice. No security cameras, no staff, no interruptions. He wanted this moment to be private, unseen by anyone else. His plan was simple but calculated. Leave the safe open and see what would happen when temptation brushed against innocence. Sofia Ramirez, 7 years old, stood barely a few feet away from the open door of the safe. She was a small child with dark brown skin, her curly hair tied into uneven puffs that hinted at the rushed morning routine she'd had with her mother. Her sleeveless, cream-colored shirt had a small tear near the hem, and her loose jeans pooled slightly around her bare ankles. She had arrived with her mother, Maria, who was in the kitchen tidying up, unaware of what was unfolding here. Eric had seen Sofia before, trailing behind Maria on cleaning days, quiet and unobtrusive. He had never paid her much attention. Today was different. Today she was the center of his attention and his experiment. The logic behind it, at least in his own mind, wasn't cruelty but curiosity. He told himself it was about understanding, about gathering proof for something he had long suspected, that those who grow up in scarcity would find it harder to resist the pull of wealth when no one was looking. The light from the safe spilled out in a warm, almost golden hue, casting the faintest shadows along the wall beside her. Eric's fingers tightened around the doorknob as he watched her small hand rest on the thick metal edge. She didn't move immediately. Instead, she stood there as if the sight before her needed a moment to settle in. Her gaze shifted across the bundles, not with greed, but with something harder to name. A mix of curiosity, hesitation, and quiet contemplation. Eric's thoughts spun as he remembered the weight of each bill, the way they represented deals, risks, and victories in his career. To him, this was an everyday object, a fixture of his life. But to her, this was likely more money than she had ever seen at once. He wondered if she felt the magnetic pull of it. He wondered if her young mind was already calculating what it could buy, what it could change. Sofia took a small step forward. Her bare feet made no sound against the plush carpet. She leaned slightly, bringing her face closer to the stacks, as if inspecting them for authenticity. Eric's breath caught in his throat. She reached her hand toward the bundles, and for a split second, he thought he had his answer. But her fingers didn't grasp the money. Instead, she reached into the back pocket of her jeans and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. The movement was deliberate, unhurried. She bent down slightly and placed the paper carefully on top of the highest stack of cash. Then, with her other hand, she eased the heavy safe door halfway closed. Not enough to lock it, but enough to shield its contents from immediate view. She stepped back without once touching the bills themselves. Eric remained frozen in place, his mind stumbling over what he had just witnessed. This wasn't the reaction he had anticipated. No sudden grab, no lingering glance of regret as she walked away. Instead, there was a strange calmness about her, as if she had already known what she would do before even approaching the safe. The test had only just begun, but already it was unraveling in ways he hadn't planned. The open safe, the silent room, the little girl standing inches from $500,000, it was all meant to confirm his assumptions. Instead, in the first few minutes, those assumptions had begun to fracture. From behind the door, Eric felt the weight of his own expectations pressing against him. He had thought he was in control of this moment, but the truth was starting to shift beneath his feet. Sophia hadn't taken anything, but the meaning of that choice, and the reason for it, remained a mystery. That mystery would pull him further into this quiet, unexpected confrontation than he had ever intended. And though neither of them knew it yet, this day would change all three lives in the apartment. Sophia stood before the half-closed safe, her small frame illuminated by the warm light spilling from within. The folded paper she had placed on the top stack of bills lay perfectly centered, as if she had rehearsed the motion. The air in the room seemed to shift, heavier now, pressing in around the space where innocence and suspicion had silently met. Eric remained hidden behind the doorway, his hand still gripping the knob, his mind running through 1,000 conflicting thoughts. This wasn't what he had pictured when he devised the test. He had imagined the subtle, guilty reach for a single bundle, or perhaps a quick, impulsive snatch of a bill, something to confirm the quiet cynicism he carried about the poor. He had expected to see temptation win, to justify the little voice in his head that told him trust had to be earned, not given. Instead, he was looking at an entirely different kind of choice. Sophia didn't glance back at the safe. She took 2 slow steps away, the carpet muffling her movement, her bare feet leaving no trace. She didn't rush toward the door or slip into the hallway to hide her actions. She simply moved with the same unhurried calm she had shown since she walked into the room. There was no trace of guilt in her posture, no attempt to mask what she had done. Eric felt his curiosity spike into something sharper. Caution and intrigue pushed him forward. He stepped into the room, the faint creak of the floor under his weight breaking the stillness. His eyes went immediately to the safe, drawn to the small, unassuming piece of paper resting against the deep green of the currency bands. Crossing the plush carpet, he crouched down in front of it. His hand hesitated for a moment before picking up the folded note. The paper was thin and slightly worn, creased from being carried in a pocket for who knows how long. When he unfolded it, the handwriting was unmistakably that of a child. Uneven letters, some pressed too hard into the paper, others barely there. It read, "My mom says if you have to steal, it means someone failed to give." The words landed with a force that caught him off guard. They were simple, almost naive at first glance, but there was something in them that pierced through the armor he had built over years of boardroom battles and calculated deals. It wasn't an accusation, yet it carried the weight of one. Eric stayed crouched there longer than he realized, the note hanging loosely between his fingers. The image of Sophia's calm expression replayed in his mind, alongside the faint echo of the choice she had made. She had been alone with $500,000 and had not only resisted taking it, she had left behind a message that cut deeper than any reprimand could. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a memory stirred. 12 years earlier, he had been in a cramped apartment on Brighton Avenue, living with his aunt after his father's death. The refrigerator had been nearly empty. One afternoon, he had found a tin cookie box on top of a shelf, hoping it might hold a forgotten treat. Instead, inside was a stack of unpaid utility bills and a single $10 bill folded neatly in half. He had stared at that bill for what felt like forever, feeling the pull of want and the sting of being unseen. But he hadn't taken it. He had quietly put it back. That same feeling, Idam, the ache of knowing what you could take but choosing not to, came rushing back now, vivid and sharp. It unsettled him. Eric rose slowly, holding the note as if it were made of something fragile. The safe still sat open, its contents untouched, but it suddenly felt less like a symbol of wealth and more like a silent witness to something larger. The test he had staged had produced an answer, but it wasn't the one he had prepared himself for. The room seemed quieter than before, the hum of the city beyond the penthouse windows muted and distant. Eric stood there, staring at the folded paper in his palm, realizing that the question was no longer whether Sophia could be trusted. The real question was why he had needed to test her in the first place, and that question, he knew, was one he couldn't ignore. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the glass walls of the penthouse, soft and golden. Eric Lane was already awake, seated at the kitchen island long before Maria and Sophia arrived. The folded note lay in front of him, its creases worn deeper from the number of times he had opened and read it during the night. He had not slept. Instead, his mind had circled the same thoughts again and again, returning to the simple, quiet act of a little girl who had defied his expectations. When the elevator doors opened, Maria stepped in with her usual air of quiet focus, her hair pinned neatly back, wearing her dark work slacks and white blouse. Plastic cleaning gloves were already on her hands, as if she intended to head straight for the work without a moment's pause. Behind her, Sophia entered, holding a small book to her chest. She kept her gaze lowered, though not in shame, rather with the calmness of someone unbothered by the need to prove herself. Eric gestured toward the table before Maria could begin her routine. She hesitated, unsure why he was interrupting. Removing her gloves slowly, she glanced at Sophia, then back to him. The silence felt deliberate, carrying a weight that Maria could sense but not yet name. He motioned for Sophia to come closer. She stepped forward without hesitation, her book still in her hands. Eric lowered himself so that his eyes met hers directly. There was no sternness in his expression now, only a quiet gravity. He thought of how easy it would have been to simply thank her and move on, but that would have been dishonest to the truth growing in his mind. For years, he had judged people like her without even realizing he was doing it. He had measured them by the neighborhoods they lived in, the jobs they worked, the clothes they wore. It was as though poverty itself was proof of weakness in his eyes. Yet here stood a child who had, without fanfare or hesitation, chosen integrity over opportunity, and in doing so, she had forced him to confront the narrowness of his own perspective. Eric sat down on the couch, nodding for Sophia to join him. She perched on the edge, feet dangling just above the floor. Her posture was steady, her gaze fixed on him with quiet expectation. He found himself speaking more slowly than usual, the words heavy as they left his mouth. He admitted that he had left the safe open intentionally, that he had wanted to see what she would do. He acknowledged that he had judged her before giving her the chance to show who she was. Sophia listened without interrupting, her expression calm but unreadable. Eric thought of how her silence felt less like absence and more like presence, as if she understood the weight of what he was saying and was giving him the space to finish. In that silence, he felt a surprising vulnerability, a rare discomfort that came from knowing he had been wrong in a way that mattered. In his mind, the note replayed over and over. If you have to steal, it means someone failed to give. It was not just a sentence, it was a challenge to the very way he had navigated the world. It was a reminder of Brighton Avenue, of the $10 bill in the tin box, of the hunger that could not be measured only by an empty fridge. As he sat there, he realized that the test he had designed had been an attempt to confirm something ugly, a belief that people would take if given the chance, that trust was a luxury only the foolish afforded. Instead, Sophia had shown him that trust was not a risk, but a responsibility. He glanced at Maria, who stood quietly in the kitchen, watching but saying nothing. Her eyes flickered with confusion, perhaps wondering if her daughter had done something wrong. Eric understood that the conversation unfolding here was not just between him and Sophia, it was also a message to Maria, one that would take shape in the decisions he was about to make. In that moment, Eric knew this wasn't the end of the lesson, it was the beginning, and the change it would bring would ripple far beyond the walls of his penthouse. The morning light filtered through the tall windows, painting the penthouse in warm shades of Dodd. Eric Lane stood near the kitchen counter, the folded note resting beside a steaming mug of coffee. He glanced toward Maria, who was quietly organizing her cleaning supplies, and then to Sophia, who sat at the edge of the couch, flipping through her small book without much focus. The decision had taken shape overnight, solidifying with every hour he spent turning her words over in his mind. This wasn't going to be a token gesture or a hollow act of charity. It had to be real change, tangible, lasting, and deserved. Eric called Maria over. She approached cautiously, still wearing the cautious posture of someone used to being addressed only about her work. He noticed how her hands instinctively fidgeted with her gloves, as though bracing for criticism or dismissal. In measured steps, he explained his intention. He told her she would no longer work as his housemaid. The words made her stiffen, her eyes dropping in fear, as if she were already rehearsing a defense for something she hadn't done. Before that fear could settle, he made the rest of his sentence clear. She would be stepping into a new role as a full-time assistant property manager for one of his downtown apartment complexes. Better hours, higher pay, and professional training, all covered by him. Maria blinked, the disbelief written in the way she struggled to respond. She had likely never been offered an opportunity that promised to lift her so far from the grind of day-to-day survival. Eric could see the tension in her shoulders, the way relief and shock collided in her expression. Then he turned to Sophia. She looked up from her book, her dark eyes steady and bright with curiosity. Eric told her about the scholarship, a full place in his educational foundation guaranteeing that when she was ready she would have access to the schooling and opportunities she deserved. There would be no worrying about tuition, no choosing between dreams and necessity. Sophia didn't speak right away. She glanced at her mother, reading the emotion on her face before letting her own reaction surface. There was joy there, but also a kind of thoughtful restraint, as though she understood the weight of what was being given and didn't want to accept it without considering its meaning. For Eric, the moment carried a strange sense of balance. This wasn't repayment. Sophia hadn't done anything for him that required it. It was acknowledgement. A recognition that the small folded paper in his desk drawer had changed him. He realized that in offering them these opportunities, he was dismantling a part of himself that had been too willing to believe the worst in people who had less. Maria's eyes welled, but she kept her voice steady, thanking him in a tone that carried both gratitude and quiet disbelief. Sophia simply nodded, still processing it all, but the faint curve of a smile touched her lips. Eric knew that when they left the penthouse that day, nothing would be the same for them, or for him. The wealth in his safe hadn't shifted, but something inside him had. And that change felt worth far more than $500,000. The late morning air in the penthouse was calm, carrying the faint scent of coffee and syrup from the breakfast they had just shared. The kitchen counters were still warm from the pancakes Eric had made with Sophia, the three of them moving together in the space with a comfort none of them had anticipated. The city hummed quietly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, but inside the world seemed slower, softer. Maria stood near the doorway, ready to gather her things. She moved with an unfamiliar hesitation, as though she didn't quite know how to step back into her old life when a new one had just been laid in front of her. Eric could see the tension in her posture, the way she tried to contain the weight of the morning's events. Sophia, still sitting at the counter, licked the last traces of syrup from her fingers before sliding her plate away. She looked around the penthouse, as if memorizing the room, not in awe, but with the awareness of someone who had been part of something significant here. Before they left, she glanced at Eric. Her expression carried a quiet mischief, the kind that children sometimes use to soften the edges of serious moments. Without breaking her steady gaze, she said the words with the ease of someone delivering a small truth. He shouldn't leave his safe open again. It was more than a joke. Beneath the lightness of her tone was a reminder of why the safe had been left open in the first place, and how that act had revealed far more about him than it had about her. Eric smiled, but it was not the quick, polite kind of smile he gave at business dinners. It was deeper, touched with understanding. The comment lingered in his mind long after they left. It replayed alongside the image of the folded note, now tucked safely in the top drawer of his desk. He knew he would keep it there, not as a token of guilt, but as a reminder of the shift it had sparked in him. For years he had believed that trust had to be earned through proof, that people's honesty could only be measured when temptation was placed directly in their path. But Sophia's act, and her words, had dismantled that belief in a way he couldn't undo. She had shown him that integrity didn't always need an audience, that sometimes it simply existed, unshaken, even when no one expected it. As the elevator doors closed behind Maria and Sophia, Eric remained standing in the center of his living room, looking toward the place where the safe was hidden. The $500,000 inside hadn't moved, yet it no longer felt like the most valuable thing in the apartment. The lesson was quiet, but it was permanent. True worth wasn't measured by what someone could take. It was measured by what they chose to leave behind. And that, Eric knew, was something no amount of money could ever buy. E for more stories. Some lessons change more than one life. What did you think of this story? Share your thoughts in the comments, like the video, and subscribe for more powerful tales.